Good morning, my friends. How's it going today? I thought I'd buckle down and sit on my ass and make a video here about happiness and laughter, and just because it's one of the subjects that was on my mind, and I thought about making a video, and then it just bypassed me, and I was like, nah, it's not worth it. What do you say about laughter that conveys just how important it really is without sounding redundant? I think most people out there are well aware that laughter is kind of an essential element to life. I would say that on the opposite end of the spectrum, which I don't really consider sadness and happiness opposites, but rather maybe sides of the same coin, but they pretty much are about as much opposite as we can imagine. Sadness and elation are extremes. And with sadness, most men, at least, are brought up to hide their tears. It's considered, at least, this is changing. Of course, over the last generation or two, this is completely changing. But up until, say up until the 70s, maybe before that, and still in many, many areas, still to this day, it's never changed. But that men are raised to be tough. If you start crying, you get bitch slapped. You shut up. You man up. Toughen up. Life's hard. And I think that a lot of that is a reflection of the parents' knowledge that, depending on the case, in some cases it can be that the parent's aware that if the kid is too weak in the type of environment that they live in, then he'll get taken advantage of, he'll get trotted on, he'll be a victim, and so it's intended to be for the good of the individual to put on this mask and be tough. And in many cases, that's true. It is a cutthroat society in many aspects, in many sections and sectors. So depending on where that kid goes, he wants to be able to handle himself. On the opposite end of that, we have, if a person hides their emotions away too much, they become numb. They become numb to others' emotions, and as sociopathy, sociopaths have learned this behavior. It's something that is their body's way of programming itself to deal with issues like that. Ignoring your emotions enough. So, crying, to me, is something that is very manly, if you will. And I don't mean manly in the sense of what we consider to be manly. I mean, if you want to be a real man, real men cry. Because you know that there are things that move you emotionally, and that release, you think of it just like a steam kettle, with a release valve, and too much pressure builds up. Sometimes we can't even tell the pressure's building until something just triggers us, and we just start bawling. And sometimes I'll see a video about somebody else who had a loved one who had died, and maybe it'll have the really moving music in the background, and I'll just start crying in the morning, and I'll think, am I crying for this person? Am I crying for people in general? Or am I crying for myself because of my similar situation, losing my father? Or there are a million reasons why we cry, and so for me, it's kind of a limited thing. I don't cry that often, but even a few times a year, or maybe once a month for a minute or two, is more than enough to feel complete reprieve from that emotion, purging the emotion. And when it comes to laughter, something that I've really noticed is a lot of people just don't know how to laugh. I mean, there are some, I'm not going to sit and label phony laughs. I can't tell what's a real laugh and a fake laugh with every single person. Some people just have funny laughs, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it just seems that a lot of folks, just kind of humoring to go along with whatever a person is saying. And let me tell you when laughter becomes a problem. It's when there's a large group of people, say on the work site. I was a contractor. I did construction for a decade and a half, on and off, and worked with a lot of different people in the construction field. So everybody sit down to lunch, and one guy decides to tell a joke about a Mexican. The plenty of Mexicans in the construction industry to make jokes about, right? Or it may be a black joke. Whether it be racial or classist, whatever you want to call it, it's laughing at the misfortune of another person, or laughing at their lack of understanding. And that's something that you would see the group kind of laugh along with, and I'm the guy who would just go, that's not very funny, I don't really like jokes like that. And then I'm the guy who's the bad guy. I'm the outcast, whatever, better than everybody else. No, I'm just stand by the way I feel about things. If something's not funny, I don't laugh at it. Which leads me into an interesting concept, and this just popped into my head when I was talking about this, but one of my subscribers, I think, was talking the other day about how much they hate shows like Family Guy and South Park. And I found that interesting because I found Family Guy and South Park to be two of the funniest shows that I've watched in my life. I mean, I laugh my ass off. And there's a huge difference between when you see the show for what it is. It's not really making fun of people. It's casting light on the absurdity of our societal issues that we have. And South Park has always been really on top of that. Anything that's happened within the last month, that's what the latest episode is going to be about. So it's very timely. So you can go back and watch any South Park episode from any time in history and know exactly when that was made and what year without even having to look up the episode, just because of the content. And I think that's something that maybe it's a kind of humor, a kind of almost sick humor and preposterous humor that for some people is not funny at all and they can't handle it. But for me, I find it funny just because of the light that it shines on the absurdity of being human and the absurdity of how we separate each other from one another, and basically taking real life situations and putting them in your face as this is what really happens. How do we feel about it? And society in general doesn't want to really deal with those issues, especially the darker sides of ourselves. I mean, there are very few people out there I've met who understand embracing, if I were to say, embrace your darkness, your dark side. They might think, what are you talking about? That's horrible, I'm not a killer, I'm not a murderer, and those people just don't understand what the dark side is. I mean, the dark side of ourselves is the side of ourselves that maybe has, hidden dreams and desires, or whether it be kinky sex habits, or the desire to jump off of some building, or maybe a weird thought about suicide. People have very interesting thoughts that they don't want to share with the world, and everyone has those thoughts. There's no doubt in my mind, anybody who has a thinking mind, who has sat by themselves and thought about life for a while, has had things cross their mind. And people will try to force this out as a bad thought. And this is how we've separated what good and evil is, where for somehow there's bad thoughts that we shouldn't have. Every thought is a thought, and it needs to be analyzed and thought about. But when it comes to humor, should not get too far off track here, there's really something interesting about people who can't laugh. And somebody pointed something out a while back that I don't want to turn this political at all, of course, but they said, how come there's no funny conservatives? How come there's no comedian conservatives or extreme right-wingers that are comedians? And somebody was analyzing that, and they were saying, well, it's because even though you may have a lot of people who agree with some of the way you feel about things, you can't go up on stage and say, yeah, fuck those refugees. They can figure out their own shit. But it is easy for a liberal to go up there and say, oh yeah, let's just, treat everybody like shit. Basically, if it's hard to express, it's hard to explain, but if a person is making jokes, but they have good intentions for the will of all people, then they can be funny, no matter how preposterous. The intention behind those jokes is what matters, not what's said. And the same can be said about an extremely conservative thinking person who maybe cracks a couple jokes about things that they know a lot of people relate to in the country, but that they're embarrassed to tell you about. I guess I could use racism as an example. We have, most of us, in one way or another, we're not racists, but we realize the difference between the races. We realize that blacks, whites, Mexicans, Chinese, all have different cultures, if you will, and whites don't have a culture, so to speak, but I'm just giving a broad example that when two white cultures clash, like just say any two white cultures, they will have very similar problems as with racial tensions. The difference is that if you can identify the difference, physical attribute between you and that other person, it's easier to divide each other. But within religions, there have been, battling black on black wars and white on white wars and Asian on Asian wars. It's not like it's a racial issue. It's a human issue. But to be able to kind of to be able to crack a joke about that, even if half the nation, let's say half my nation, let's say, is racist in one way or another, just speculative, just throw that out there as a, I'm not saying that it's true, I'm saying let's use this as an example. And then somebody were to come out and make a joke, a racist joke, you would think that half the people would go along with it, but there seems to be a part of our own minds that lets us know when something's just not right. And I feel like humans aren't being honest with themselves, at least all around the world. I say humans because, it's easy to label Americans as the problem, but that's not the problem at all. We can only go by the very small paradigm that we have and our own realities and where we live. And, so to sum up, laughter really is the best medicine. It's the one thing that brings us all together, besides mourning. Like if there was a major disaster to happen on Earth and we were all forced to come together to help one another, you would stop seeing sex or race or culture and start seeing people that can help each other. It's always like this after a major catastrophe, but we haven't had one big enough to really show the world that we can come together. But we do come together over sorrow and mourning, and at the extreme opposite end, we can come together over laughter. But it has to be funny. It has to be truly funny. And I think that's very subjective. I can't tell you what's funny. But what's funny to me is pointing out the absurdity of life. The obvious things that we know are true, but that we just don't know how to express. So, laughter, they say it's the best medicine. Probably is. One thing I always loved about taking mushrooms is the little laughing fits that you'll have a couple hours in, sitting with friends and just giggling and laughing, just can't even catch your breath style laughing, and that alone may be one of the greatest healing, modes that we know of, laughing about things, even if it's not even that funny. Just find a way to laugh, right? Maybe that's why some people do laugh at absurd jokes or, ones that put other people down, is because that's all they can grab. That's all that makes them laugh. That's, whatever is funny to you. But it does tell a little bit about who we are as to the things we laugh about. So maybe the fact that I laugh at South Parks makes me kind of a, I don't know, dirty person, right? I don't know how to label it. I'm a human, and I see that we're all human, and that we all have these things that we share, and we try to mask and hide them away, and it's just preposterous. But once in a while, there's a moment of clarity, and we can share with others our experiences. So, peace. I'll talk to y'all later, and have a wonderful day. Stay safe.